Oh,
Okay.
that's a good question.
All right. I'd now like to introduce Rabbi Sandra Cohen. Rabbi Sandra Cohen received her BA summa cum laude from Macalester College and a master's in Hebrew literature and ordination from Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, where she was a Wexner Graduate Fellow. She began her congregational rabbinical career as an assistant rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Denver, Colorado. Then she served as rabbi at Temple Micah in Denver beginning in 1997. Following a stroke and subsequent health challenges in 2002, Rabbi Cohen left the congregational rabbinate. Rabbi Cohen is involved in mental health outreach in the Jewish community, both locally and nationally. She is also teacher, primarily of rabbinic text, in a variety of settings in both the Jewish and larger Denver community. In addition, she also offers pastoral care to individuals and families. Rabbi Cohen and her husband Ben have a daughter, Shira, who is in law school at CU Boulder, Denver. Boulder, sorry. As many of you know, mental illness in its many forms is pervasive in the Jewish and non-Jewish community. Rabbi Sandra Cohen will talk about her own journey in mental illness and her search for community. She will share her insight and experience on how to make our Jewish organizations places of caring and home for all members. Rabbi?
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now because I know how. Right, here you go. So here we go. Let's see if we can make this work, huh? Oh, come on. All right. So this should look familiar to many of us. It occurred to Pooh and Piglet that they hadn't heard from Eeyore in many days. So they put on their hats and their coats and they trotted across the 100-acre wood to Eeyore's house. And inside the house was Eeyore. "Hello, Eeyore," said Pooh. "Hello, Pooh. Hello, Piglet," said Eeyore in a glum-sounding voice. "We thought we'd check on you," said Piglet, "because we hadn't heard from you and we wanted to know if you were okay." And Eeyore was silent for a moment. "Am I okay?" he asked eventually. "Well, I just don't know, to be honest. Are any of us really okay? That's what I ask myself. All I can tell you, Pooh and Piglet, is that right now I feel rather sad and alone and not much fun to be around at all, which is why I haven't bothered you. Because you wouldn't want to waste your time hanging out with someone who is sad and alone and not very much fun to be around at all, would you now?" Pooh looked at Piglet, and Piglet looked at Pooh, and they both sat down on either side of Eeyore in his stick house. Eeyore was surprised. "What are you doing?" "We're sitting here with you," said Pooh, "because we are your friends. And true friends don't care if someone is feeling sad or alone or not much fun to be around at all. True friends are there for you anyways. And so here we are." "Oh," said Eeyore. "Oh." And then the three of them sat in silence. And while Pooh and Piglet said nothing at all, somehow, almost imperceptibly, Eeyore started to feel a very tiny little bit better because Pooh and Piglet were there. No more, no less. I'm going to tell you a story. It was crowded in the lobby outside the sanctuary. It was after a funeral of a longtime synagogue member. And even though I was no longer the rabbi of this congregation, I had come to pay my respects. But now I also had the chance to catch up with some former congregants. I saw a middle-aged couple at whose son's bar mitzvah I had officiated. "How is Alan?" I said, thinking he must be a young man now in college. And the answer was hesitant and uncomfortable. And I prodded, "What's up?" Finally sensing, I hope, that I really did in fact want to know, they told me. "He has schizoaffective disorder. He's in and out of college. It's really hard, indeed. What, in fact, is the right thing for the rabbi to say at such a moment? What is the right thing for anyone to say? And so mostly what I tried to do was listen. Right? This must be difficult for you, for all of you. How is Alan doing? How are you doing? We all feel really that's the wrong way. We all feel inadequate, right? When someone we care about is suffering. You might have a friend who is sad all the time, who keeps saying, everyone would be better off without me if I just disappeared. Maybe your friend is obsessed with losing weight, refusing to eat or throwing up after every meal. And what do? You have someone in your life who you care about and they are hurting and in trouble. And it is so obvious to you, even though they may not be getting the help they need. Or maybe you are the one who is in pain and you don't know what to do. No one seems to notice and you feel alone. You feel stupid, the only one who doesn't cope. This is a blessing we say each morning. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, she'asa li kol tzarchi. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who provides for all our needs. Right? We usually say this is part of the morning blessings when we first wake up. We bless God for being able to stand, for being free, for made in God's image, and so on. And I think about this one every single time I say it. And what I think is, come on. Does God really provide for all our needs just like that? It is not our lived reality. Life in general, but especially when you or a loved one is ill, this blessing doesn't seem to correspond to the idea that God is going to simply provide for all of our needs, right? It's just not that simple. And nor is it simple to adjust to having a child, any kind of family member or friend, right, with a mental health issue. As parents, especially, and grandparents, we have a vision for our child. He'll go straight to college and grad school. She'll become a doctor, or perhaps, chas v'chalila, she'll become president. Well, we love that child no less. But to say that there is no loss, that would be ingenuous. As it is said in the mental health community, we parent, we love, we accept the child or the relative or the self that we have. And when we do so, we begin to see that perhaps God may have given us resource all around us, right? Shema Kolenu, says one of our intermediate blessings, right? Hear our voice, Adonai, our God, have compassion upon us, accept our prayer with loving favor. You listen to prayer. Do not turn us away empty-handed, O sovereign. For you mercifully listen to your people's supplication. Blessed are you, Hashem, who hearkens to prayer. In the daily Amidah, right, in those blessings we traditionally say 3 times daily, we encounter this idea of a God who listens. Not necessarily one who's going to give us all the other things we're petitioning for, but a God who is present, who is with us, who, if given the chance, might offer us a way to be changed through our encounter with the Shekhinah, with the divine presence, who is always available to us. This prayer, the Shomea Tefillah prayer, right, reminds us that it is through the act of praying, that is, of opening ourselves up to the Shekhinah by allowing ourselves to be present with the divine presence, that is how we become transformed. That is how we will not be turned away empty-handed. Not necessarily by getting things through riches or cures or magical fixes, but rather by the gift of presence. Being in God's presence will change us. So too, as God is present for us, if we allow our souls to experience acceptance and thereby grow, so too can we grow as friends, congregants, Jews, human beings, and we might learn how to be there for one another. See, sorry, we did this. There we go. The first step, right, is to be there for each other. But it's really important to start with the idea that mental health, mental illness, addiction issues, brain injuries, other people in despair, it's everywhere. 1 in 25 adults in the US have a mental illness in any given year that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And that's only gone up during the pandemic. 1 in 5 youth, right? 20% experience a severe mental disorder at some point during their life. For children slightly younger, the estimate is something like 13%. 1% of adults in the US live with schizophrenia. 2.6 live with bipolar disorder. At the time when I first put this together, 7% of adults in the US, 16 million, have had at least one major depressive episode during the past year. And again, this has only grown. Horrifyingly, the delay between the onset of symptoms and intervention is around 8 to 10 years. Mental health conditions are the leading cause of disability in the US, and suicide is the second leading cause of death for our young adults age 15 to 24, the 10th leading cause of death for all Americans. This is something we need to take seriously. Right? Mental health, right? So we want to know that what we need sometimes, love doesn't fix everything. I have my own story to tell, right? My own story of mental illness. You guess by my topic? Maybe you can tell by looking at me. My journey in psychiatric illnesses began when I was a teenager. I experienced depression in my early teens, if not before. I began therapy around age 15, and I pretty much continued straight through rabbinical school, where I took a year off in Israel, came back, and went back into therapy. I was so blessed in marrying my husband, Ben, my wonderful hubby, in my last year of rabbinical school. I became a rabbi. We got married. I became a rabbi. I got the job. We moved to Denver. And a couple years later, we had my daughter, Shira. And you can guess where that may have led. Sure enough, postpartum depression. I have been in therapy ever since. Every year I go to my gynecologist to refer me to my therapist, and she says, "Are you still in therapy?" And I say, "Yes." The baby is almost 24 years old. In January of 2002, lightning struck in my life. I had a stroke, big one. I was blessed to have been treated soon afterwards, but while the left side of my body now works, as does my speech, the stroke and subsequent TIAs and minor strokes followed, right, have left me with a lot of symptoms: chronic fatigue, dizziness and balance issues, chronic migraines, pain, executive function impairment, and worsening bipolar disorder featuring recurrent treatment-resistant depression. But what are you going to do? This is my skin in the game. It's hard to look at how my mental illness has affected not only me, but my family. Even now, as I sit with friends, when they reminisce about the joy of nursing their babies, all I can remember is that my daughter used to scream at my breast, unable to latch on, and my tears mixing with hers. The failure I felt then, I feel now. Who can't breastfeed her own child? Me, it turns out. For a number of reasons, physical, hers and mine. But even today, that experience of postpartum depression can come roaring back, even if just for a moment. Sometimes now, when I look at my beautiful daughter, all I can think of is all of the times I failed her because I was knocked out by depression over those years of her growing up. I saved every bit of energy I have for her, clawing my way out of bed to have dinner with the family, to find out how her day was at school, to pretend I wasn't dying inside, that I was a normal mama. I love her so much. And yet I know I wasn't always there for her. And yet, would anybody blame a mom who was absent because of her cancer treatments? How are my years of struggle with depression and bipolar any different? The stigma of mental illness is both external, but it's also internal in our communities, in our hearts of those who struggle with mental illness themselves. But the first thing we need to know is that, oddly enough, sometimes love isn't going to fix it all, right? Let me just see where I am in my PowerPoint. Come on. Right, mental illness, right? So who are the people with mental illnesses, just by the way, right? We have people in our communities with dementia and with addictions. Although we're certainly could be more, and we can certainly be more welcoming of 12-step groups on our synagogue grounds when we open our synagogues back up. Depression is even acquiring a degree of social acceptance, but usually only in its minor forms, rather than the kind that prevents someone from functioning or from getting out of bed. More feared are things like bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia. There are anxiety disorders, and whose sufferers are often told to just get over it. There are those who work with personality disorders, PTSD, and all sorts of other things. Psychiatric illnesses have many levels, right? Some of them are biologically based. So they're right? So, but, yeah, right? Psychologically based, they're biologically based, they have social ramifications and spiritual concerns. In the Jewish community, we want to acknowledge all these different levels of suffering and disease and note where we can best help communally, religiously, and spiritually. Mental illness affects our families, our children, it affects our careers, it affects how we see each other, ourselves. Mental illness, however, is an illness. And by seeing it as an illness, that helps us to begin to stop the stigma and move on from there. As I said, we have dementia, we have addictions, we have depression, we have bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder, anxiety disorders, personality disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, self-harming behaviors from anorexia and bulimia to people who cut themselves just to feel something. As I said, and so we have biologically based, psychologically, social, spiritual. Religious organizations can offer communal support, religious support, and spiritual support. And that's what we're doing here today. Okay, next. First thing we need to understand is what the arc of a narrative looks like, that it's one of healing and not cure, for both the sake of the one who is ill and for the sake of those who want to help. Too often we tell a story. The narrative arc is you have a problem, there's a crisis, you get help, and then what happens? You're cured. This is not the actual reality for most people who are actually experiencing mental illness. You may have a problem, you may have a crisis, help is available, there's medication, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, analysis, but that does not mean that you're going to have a simple cure. The reality is that there's generally an illness, it goes into remission for a while with the help of perhaps medications, perhaps with therapy, perhaps a combination, all sorts of things. And then there are recurrences. And so when we need to, instead of expecting someone with mental illness to be finished already, we want to know where they are in their cycle. Just as someone with cancer might have a recurrence or someone with MS might have an episode, so too for those with mental illnesses. When we hope happens is it goes into remission and so on, up and down and up and down. So how do we help? How do we in the religious community reach out to those with mental illnesses and their families, to those who are seeking our help, and to the ones who are hiding in our pews? What can we do to ease their journeys and to find their own gifts that they can share us? So it begins with, but it doesn't end with clergy and other leaders in the community. In some ways, they are the first line in normalizing mental health issues in our communities. But even for them, even for our leaders, right, we often have hurdles to overcome. When discussing my plans to work on mental health outreach with a friend of mine, a rabbi who I'd known for 30 years, she said, "Oh, like depression?" "Yes," I replied, "and bipolar." And she interrupted me and she said, "Bipolar? That's scary." So I said, "I've known this woman for over 30 years. She's a kind and loving person. And yet I'm bipolar," I long to say. "I'm not scary," but I didn't. So what gets in the way? Often it's fear for both clergy and lay leaders. What do we fear? We fear we don't know enough about their illness to help. We're afraid we're not going to be able to fix it. We're not going to fix the disabled person or be able to meet all the needs of their families. We're afraid that person will need more than we can give, and we won't know how to say no and set a limit. We're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And we might feel the mentally ill themselves, right? They're needy. He may be needy, she might be off-putting. And then what happens is that these fears of not being enough leads us to not do anything at all. So instead, what we want to do is to make a beginning. We want to accept that we cannot fix someone with mental illness. We can't solve all the problems of their families. But knowing that, the question is, what can we do? Our goal is not to force people to disclose their mental illness, right? That should remain a personal choice, but rather to create congregations that have a culture of care and welcoming for all. What does that look like? What does that look like? What are the mitzvot around welcoming those with mental illness in our communities? What midot, what values come into play when we try to help those around us who are hurting? When reminded to value those people who might be a little bit different, but are still part of our communities, whether they're friends, family members, or ourselves. And the three mitzvot I really want to talk about are fourfold. Haknesat orchim, welcoming guests. Bikur holim, visiting the sick. Gimilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness. And derech eretz, right? Treating others with dignity, walking with them. These are important ones. So we start with Haknesat orchim. And I look at this picture and I think, remember when we used to get together like that with people with our mouths open and smiling? Those will be the day. Okay. We want to make it clear in any community that we are aware of mental illness and that we accept it as part of a normal life experience. As such, congregations and community organizations can do really basic things, such as we can have information about mental health organizations and elsewhere in our congregations and on our websites, ranging from the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill and community resources like JFS, AA, JACS, right? There are so many different, organizations that are going to be useful. And having the information out on our website with its own little link and in our lobbies of our congregation sends a message that says, we know that there are mentally ill people in our community, and we think that's a normal thing. We can post the National Suicide Helpline, which has a phone number and has a text, and actually it has website, suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Very soon, we know that we are going to, by next year, we'll be rolling out 811, which will be the 3-digit number that people who need help with their mental illnesses can call, the same way that when you experience a physical illness, you call 911. Colorado Crisis Services, right? There's many organizations. The Trevor Project is especially good. It's suicide intervention and education for gay, lesbian, and transgender youth. And we know that speaking to a supportive adult reduces the rate of suicide in LGBTQ teens by almost half. There's there's Safe to Tell. Safe to Tell is about reporting concerns about family, friends, and community. It allows it, right? It's a place to kind of say, well, I'm not quite sure what's going on, but I'm worried about this person. I'm worried they might hurt themselves or they might hurt somebody else, right? In my community, we've been working on postcards and business cards for help. In the community I belong to, Rodef Shalom, in the women's bathrooms, in each bathroom stall is a note noting that Ashkenazi Jewish women are more likely to have breast cancer genes and we should get tested. It's certainly as true that we should have mental health outreach in the same way, in both public spaces, but also private ones. So that if someone's, for example, in our shul, when we come back to shul in person, and they need something, but don't know how to ask, we might have a postcard addressed to the rabbi that they could put their name on and leave in her office. We're trying to develop in my community a business-sized card that would have some information like the National Suicide Helpline and like such on the one side, and on the other side have a link that you can go to our resource page where we tell you all sorts of organizations that might be here to help. By putting it on something small and discreet, it would allow people to get the help they need or put them in contact with their resources without there having to be any shame about it because someone sees that you might need help. It's the same way that we have brochures about women's health, women's crisis lines, and for women who are being abused in the bathroom so they can slip it into their purse. So too for both men and women. Do we want a private way to make sure they can get the help that they need? We can host meetings, right? NA, AA, OA, Al-Anon, Friends of Bill W, right? All the different 12 steps groups. 12-step addiction issues are as common in the Jewish community as any other community. And it's high time we took note of that and made, if not our space to be one where we hold meetings, then we need to help people link up to places where they can get help. The government site is called Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services. And there it is, right? www.samhasa.gov, which has many more resources, which is useful for those of us who might not live in central metropolitan areas where there's as much helpful. That's Haknesat Arachim, right? It says you people may be strangers now, but we want you to be our guests, and we hope that you will be part of our community. One of the reasons I speak from the pulpit in various congregations is to say two things. One is to say, I have a complicated life story, and I want to share it with you so that you know that other people whose lives are also complicated, and aren't all our lives complicated, can feel welcome. It should be the choice of a family member or an individual with a mental health issue about whether they want to disclose it or not. But they can feel welcome in our community either way by when we say to them, we know about mental health stuff here and we're really comfortable with it. And then comes Bikur Cholim, visiting the ill, visiting and caring for them. And so one of the things that's hard right now is the lack of personal places. One of the ways that we know, for example, we might notice, you might notice online at services, you might notice when services come back in person, and adult ed in person or regular adult ed, that people who are normally there suddenly disappear. They're just lost for a while. And we can welcome them back with the same concern. First of all, we can take note that they're gone, And secondly, we can help to welcome them into our communities the same way we recognize and help people who have cancer, who have MS, who have a heart condition, right? So in the church and the synagogue and mosques, what do we do? One of the things that we do is to note that mental illness is an illness. Healing from it is going to take time, effort, and care from the community as well. When we are accepting and matter of fact about mental health issues the same way we are about physical health issues, it goes a long way for people to be more open and open up about their own life stories. That in turn reduces stigma and perhaps encourages other people to come forward and get help with whatever struggles they're having. Okay, so the rabbis taught us that when someone is sick and we visit them, we take away 1/60th of their illness, right? Which is the smallest amount in rabbinic Judaism that still matters. There's a lot of wisdom. It's not our job as a priest, as a rabbi, as a congregant, as a friend, as a member of a caring committee, as a family member, to heal somebody with mental illness. We can't fix all the problems that family members may be having, but rather our teaching that healing the sick takes away 1/60th of their illness. This is a reminder that what we do can matter, right? Simply being with someone, wherever she is in her suffering, matters. So in the synagogue, in the church, in the mosque, in the synagogue, right, we have a mishaberach, and the mishaberach itself actually talks about this already, right? It says a refuat nefesh and refuat guf, a healing of soul and a healing of body, a refuah shlema, a complete healing. It's really helpful for those who are involved in saying a mishaberach from the front of the bima, whether that's a rabbi or a lay leader, to remind us of that there's all kinds of illnesses, mental and physical and spiritual, and we want healing from all of them. How many times do we have to say that? And I ask you to think back. How many times do you tell a little kid to look both ways before crossing the street, right? We have to say it over and over and over again until people actually begin to believe it. Right? We mentioned mental illness from the bima. We notice when people go missing and reach out, and we can reach out in just so many small ways, right? To send an email to somebody and said, usually you're in our Thursday morning Talmud class and I haven't seen you for a few weeks. I'm kind of worried. How are you doing? A text message, a phone call, a postcard, just to say when people disappear, we want to know why and let them know they're being missed. One of the things we can also do is to offer to help instead of waiting to be asked. People with mental illness, not all of them, but depending, but we also have a hard time even conceiving what kind of help we need. Depression, anxiety, psychosis, these are the kind of things that interfere with a person from being able to evaluate what might help. Families can be overwhelmed, just as families who are dealing with cancer are. And then there's the stigma of mental illness. So as clergy people, as caring committee members, as anyone in a community, we want to go an extra step and offer concrete suggestions of how we can help, as well as being open to other requests. So as I said, regular phone calls to check in. It can be a 2-minute phone call. It can be a message left on somebody's voicemail because they don't feel up to answering it. Just to say, I know you're having a hard time right now. I know your family's having a hard time right now. I'm thinking of you. Feel free to reach out if you need something. Specific offers of help are really useful. For example, you can say, would you like me to give you a call Sunday afternoon and we'll just talk for a little while so you have some company, right? You might say, I'm going to the grocery store. Text me your grocery list and I'll get the good produce for you, not the stuff that they pick out on their own. As we emerge from the pandemic and become more widely vaccinated, offering small but in-person help is really valuable. You can go to someone's house, help them with laundry and their dishes, which might be a small thing for those of us offering the assistance, but a huge mitzvah for someone who is ill and overwhelmed. This helps an isolated person feel like their absence is noted and that their presence is missed. Emails are good, right? Let them know. It's really, it's really fine. If we're not willing to kind of meet in person yet, although as the weather warms, we can sit on the front porch or the back deck, be masked, be distanced, be vaccinated, and it becomes more possible to be in present. But an email or a text, right, makes the family and the mentally ill person feel like they are cared about. And it takes us very little time and effort. And then, of course, there are the concrete stuff. I think little chicken soup, picture, right? Offering meals, offering rides, just as we would for anybody else, right? Offering to help somebody set up a meal train where other people can sign up to bring them food. All of this can be really overwhelming when you're ill, but really easy for someone who's just reaching out. Okay. Sometimes people with mental illness act in ways that puzzle and frustrate other people. It makes it hard for them to know how to respond, even though we would like to welcome them and be present for them. So understanding common behaviors and symptoms of mental illnesses can help us as well as having strategies to deal with them. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to end up there, but never doing this. First, I want to talk about derech eretz, and I'll come back. I'm sorry. So derech eretz, right? Gimilut chasadim, deeds of loving kindness. So when someone with a mental illness, for example, is withdrawn into themselves because they're depressed and they're down, whether it's from or paralyzing anxiety, who knows what can we do? We can initiate conversation with simple things as what is going on around them, their family, the weather, for goodness sakes. It can help a person find a way to interact without them having to reveal their deepest secrets to you, right? Whatever sports teams you follow, that's always a good place to start. When someone is the other way, when they are overstimulated, maybe they're manic or they're really wound up in their anxiety, or someone who's having a psychotic episode, you're going to want to do the opposite and limit input, right? They might just need a calm silence with you, right? Like Pooh and Piglet sitting with Eeyore. They want a gentle smile or a wave. Mentally ill people are not always good with boundaries. So, for us, we need to be able to set those limits. But so when a mentally ill person is feeling insecure, right? We want to be accepting. When they say, I'm not good enough, or I'm sorry to take your time, or I'm such a bother, it's not your job to make them feel better, but it is your job to give them true feedback. I see you're having a hard time. I don't mind being here with you. If you just want to sit, that's fine with me. I have no expectations. Okay? When people, as I said, mentally ill people sometimes are not good with boundaries, and they can be very needy. And that can be really frightening to somebody who's trying to be with them, because it can feel like they're going to just suck all the energy out of you. That leads us to saying, I'm not going to spend any time with this person because it's too hard. We want to find a space for the middle where we can accept person as they are, and at the same time to set limits for our own sake. Limit setting, things like I can visit, but I can only be there for half an hour, or I'm going to drop off some food, but I can't stay and chat. That allows us to have the energy for interacting with them again later, right? If we feel like we have to fix it all now, then we're never going to start, and we'll never go back because it's just too hard. Okay. When a person is fearful or insecure, one of the best things we can do is to lend them our calm presence, accepting her, reminding her she is welcome and safe, and that can be a lifeline. When someone's in a lot of pain, they're depressed, they're anxious, we want to listen to what they're saying and just be a calm, present, caring presence. right? We be empathic. We don't have to agree with how they see the world, but we don't have to change it either. Finally, if somebody you know is actively suicidal and actively threatening self-harm, we need to know when to get help. So it is always okay to say to somebody, I'm worried about you. Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Or even, are you thinking about killing yourself? The research is very clear. Asking those kinds of questions do not put ideas in people's heads. If someone is not suicidal, then they are not going to suddenly become suicidal because you mentioned the word. On the other hand, when we ask in a compassionate, caring way, it might give room for someone to say, yeah, actually I am. I'm stockpiling pills, or I just bought a gun. And we want to know how serious that is. Can that person make not so much a commitment to never hurting themselves, but a contract to get help? I'm concerned. Have you talked to your therapist about this? Because I'm really worried. And if you think that they are in any kind of imminent danger, even if you're not sure, you understand that's beyond your pay grade and you get help. You call 911, you drive them to the hospital emergency room, you sit with them literally as you call their psychiatrist or their therapist. It's not your job to be able to keep someone safe, but we can help someone who is unsafe get me to the help we need. Right? So safety contracts don't work, but safety plans work. Safety plans do. You help them make a plan and you help them get their help. My friend Becca, which is not her, all names have been changed to protect the innocent. My friend Becca told me of a time when she had a child who was quite physically ill and in the hospital. And she remembers meeting a friend of hers in the grocery store. How is John? The friend asked. And Becca began to tell her. It wasn't until she was about 2 paragraphs into dumping her tale of woe on this friend that she looked up and saw the panicked look. Oh, this is not a real question, right? I needed to talk, she thought, but my friend did not want to hear. And this is what I learned from that. You should only ask if you're really ready to listen, especially if you're in a listening profession, but anyone really. If what you mean is hello, it's better to not ask, how are you? If someone needs to talk and you don't have the time or the energy, don't pretend to listen. They'll know you're not paying attention. You can say, I can't talk right now, right? Can we make a time later? Only ask if you want to know, right? Being with someone, holding them, if you will, is a gift. And don't pretend you can give it when you can't. People know. But when you are available, people will also know, and that will help them to feel loved. Okay, so the last mitzvah is, we're going to get to. So the last mitzvah is around derech eretz, a right way to act, treating others as we want to be treated. And it obviously overlaps with the other mitzvot here, right? We want to welcome people who are sick and their families. We want to go beyond seeing them as an ill person, but rather to see them as a person. We want to reach out to them as members of our communities who happen to have a distinct set of needs. So this mitzvah of derech eretz, of the right way to act, right? It calls us to be truly present with our fellow congregants and members, even as they are ill and in need. And how do we do that? We have some more ideas. So when someone, for example, is not grounded in reality, you want to listen for kernels of truth you may be able to hold on to, but you might also wait for a better time. If someone is delusional, do not argue with them. It is not useful. The same way that we don't blame someone, for example, as Alzheimer's, and who does what they call sundowning, right? By the end of the day, they're much more confused than they are at the beginning of the day. It's not useful to argue with someone who has dementia. You want to just be accepting. When somebody doesn't have any empathy, understand that may be a symptom and you want to not respond defensively. If they have difficulty making contact, you want to initiate the contact. If the person seems to be completely lacking in self-esteem, full of self-hatred, what we want to do is affirm that person and who they are and their innate worth. How do we do derech eretz? Right? The first is this idea of what in psychology is called being a non-anxious presence. That is to say, you don't get freaked out by what they say. You don't wind up with them. You might just, you just listen and let them talk. And if they don't want to talk and don't want to hear you talk, then you can just sit. But the goal for us is to be calm and nurturing and not frightened and agitated. Knowing when to engage and when not to is tricky. We might show a gentle curiosity. You don't need to know everything about a person's illness or a family member's experience. You can ask things like, how is that for you? That sounds tough. Do you want to tell me more? Right? I said to this family, I don't know much about schizoaffective disorder. Do you want to tell me about it? Or should we want to just talk about how you're doing? Gentle questions like this can help a person feel heard and like you want to hear more. It makes you feel less alone. An attitude of caring, right? People, interestingly enough, will forgive you saying all sorts of stupid things if they know that there's an underlying sense of concern. Every word doesn't have to be right. It's okay. Less is often more. With Pooh and Piglet and Eeyore, sometimes we have to learn how to sit in silence together and just be. And as I mentioned before, sometimes folks with mental illness don't have a good sense of boundaries, what's appropriate, and they may ask for more than we can give. So, okay, it's important to say no when we mean no. We want to remember that we're in this for care and not cure. We're in it for a long haul. This is not a TV show or movie that has a solution and a happy ending in 45 minutes or 2 hours. This is real life and it takes time. You can't fix your friend. You don't have to fix your friend. It's sort of like going over to a family who's just had a new baby. You don't expect to make the baby sleep through the night, but you might hold the baby for a little while so the mom can get a shower. So too with families and individuals experiencing mental illness, addictions, and traumas. Sometimes just being there for a little bit is enough. You don't fix your friend, but you can be a friend. You can help them and you can stay a friend, as it were, through thick and thin. You can let them know that that you see them as a friend, as a fellow congregant, as a person and not a disease, not something less than or somehow shameful. You can learn to be present for one another. We can learn to see, one might say, the image of God in each other. Right? We want to hang out. We can ask for help. And we want to help people make meaning in their own lives, even if it's small. To say to them, you may feel like you're a disappointment, but you've always been a good friend to me, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. As Calvin and Hobbes says, right? We are all made b'tselem Elohim. We are all made in the divine image. What we want to do is have our communities send that message explicitly and implicitly in our speech and our actions. We are all created in the image of God. All we really need to do is look at the other person and see their neshama smiling back at us. And those are the best things we can do to help each other out. So that was an awful lot of talking. And you know, now it's time for you to talk. Do you have questions, comments, critiques, good recipes, you know? No.
So much, Rabbi Cohen. I think if folks would like to, they can one by one take themselves off mute. We'll try not to have everyone, but Gail, I see your hand raised.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, that was very powerful, and thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you.
It really touched my heart. When you talked about the cards, When I was in middle school and we had a suicide in middle school and another attempted suicide,
Uh-huh.
the kids all carried little cards that they could just pass on
Mhm.
to a friend or to a teacher. And it was so helpful. So many kids told their counselors, told their parents how comfortable they were carrying that in their pocket because they knew of a kid who talked about taking a parent's gun, or they knew of a kid who was stealing pills. And it was a really safe way just to pass the card on,
Yeah.
you know, so-and-so's in trouble, a way of quietly sharing without anybody knowing who did the reporting. So
Right.
I,
with that- So it didn't feel like tattling or right.
exactly. And it was very helpful in our middle school at the time. And to my knowledge, I don't know if it made a difference, but we never did have another suicide, though we certainly had troubled kids who
Yeah.
got help. So I just wanted to reaffirm what a great idea that is.
That's wonderful to hear. And it's hard because our teenagers, our tweens and our teens often know the kids who are in trouble and they need help. And they don't know what to do with that information, right? There's a culture of not telling, which we don't want to betray someone's secret, but they know who's throwing up in the bathroom after every meal, right? And if we can help our kids find ways, and when I talk with the kids, I talk kind of about levels of telling, that you don't always just have to tell a kid's parents, right? There's a counselor at school, you can talk to your rabbi, you could talk to a teacher, you could talk to your own parent. There are a lot of different ways of reaching out for help. And I think it's because it's really hard for kids to know kind of when to tell. So making it easier for them to do that can be really important in saving our kids,
Right.
And the other thing I like to remind our kids these days is that the power of being in person with a friend is really important, because right, they text and they text and they DM on Facebook or whatever, but sometimes you just need someone, right? And a text or a phone call isn't enough. You need someone who's actually there. And that's true for us too. As I say, as we start climbing out of the pandemic, it becomes possible once again for us to actually see each other, even if it's outside, yelling at each other across the lawn. Still, it's a powerful thing to do. So much talking and no questions. Oi.
Well, I could tell you one other thing about nursing your child, and don't carry that guilt, and you weren't an awful mom. I know somebody very well who had 3 live children and a couple of other miscarriages in between, had the lactose nurse, had all kinds of assistance, and was never able to breastfeed. So there are plenty of people out there like that.
Oh, yeah, I know. I just tend to hang out with hippie people who nurse their children to their 12 or whatever.
Yeah, right.
But
Don't carry that guilt around.
But
This
now
lady's kids are terrific
she
without
thinks,
having been nursed.
she thinks seems to have poo become a really wonderful young adult. So, but that's just bragging.
That's a mother's right to brag.
It is, it's the privilege, right? The poo, right? Everything should be good and fine by all the families. Okay, so if there aren't particular pieces, I can certainly, we've been together for an hour now, so that's a long time.
I do have from a religious institutional point of view.
Yeah.
You did make reference to like Jewish Family Services and other agencies out there.
Mhm.
But one of the issues with mental health is paying for affording coverage, whether it's talk therapy or even medication. The cost is outrageous, and many times people just don't have the finances. It's not covered by insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any experience on how you maybe can help in addition to whatever other resources are out there?
So for example, and it is a huge issue, and I mean, we have in Colorado, we've had parity for years and years and years, where they have to cover like at least what are called biologically based mental illnesses the same way that physical illnesses are called. And if you're lucky enough to have insurance, they'll generally be able to send you a whole list of therapists and psychiatrists. The problem is that many of those therapists and psychiatrists aren't taking new clients, right? And so it's really hard to find someone who is. There are other people, people who don't take insurance for other reasons. And there's the whole dilemma of how people just choose that is a whole other thing. There are places like, for example, Mental Health Center of Denver, takes anybody walk-in and will help you with finances. JFS works on a sliding scale. My guess is that, although it may not be the most comfortable places for all Jews, is that Catholic Charities also has that sort of help. There are some low-income places I know in Denver. Maria Drosty has also does low-income stuff in Denver. One of the good places to go is if there is a local chapter of NAMI, of National Alliance for Mentally Ill, because they will often have those resources to say, here's a good way to go about it, or here's a way to find someone. But the shortage of care is acute and real and frustrating. When someone is, it's sort of like when you're having a heart attack, you don't want to be told that the cardiologist can see you in 3 months. In the same way, right? If you're having a mental health crisis, you need somebody then. And I think we want to work harder to help our clergy have a bigger kind of more resources for people in terms of actual referrals. Here's who goes where and who takes insurance and who doesn't take insurance. But in some ways, that issue is needing to be addressed on the state level. I know that we passed legislation last year about people being able to have like one mental health checkup a year, kind of like a screening, the same way you have a patient visit with your primary care doctor. You might be able to do that with a mental health provider, and that should be covered by insurance. We know that right now there's over the summer they're putting out lots of resources for kids, for our kids and our teens to be able to have access to mental health care through their school district. And that's happening in the state legislature as well. But I don't know how to solve the issue of not enough providers and too much money, especially given that for many of us, it's a long-term illness, right? If what you need is 8 weeks with someone, that's one thing. If what you need is somebody twice a week for the next 20 years, that's expensive. We joke in my family that my husband works not so much for the income as for the health insurance. It's and medication is expensive too, just by the way, right? That's its own piece, and it's a piece of the puzzle we haven't solved, that in some ways, and it's a shanda. It's a disgrace.
Well, as a retired teacher, we used to joke, though we didn't make a lot of money, we had great benefits, great insurance, and
it's true, it mattered, right? Like
exactly.
But it's also true, is pointing out that sometimes even when you have insurance, finding a provider that has time can be really, really challenging. And again, for somebody who's in the middle of a crisis, finding that for themselves is really hard. So the more we can get our communal institutions to help people hook up with them, even just serve as a gateway, that's also an important thing, right? Because many of us say, I need a therapist. I don't know where to start. Or I need a psychiatrist. Well, anybody can hang out a shingle. Well, that's not true, but.
Well, it's interesting you should say that. I moved here 6 years ago, and it was a big move, starting a new life all over as a widow. My daughter and son-in-law and family are here, and they're great. And I thought I might need a little help to get through it. And I had used a social worker in Michigan after my husband died. Well, I have a friend who's a social worker. I have a lot of medical connections. My son-in-law is a doctor. it was very hard finding somebody who would take insurance. I just wanted to have a name in case I needed it.
Yeah.
I decided I didn't need it, and I've done fine without it. But it was the same thing with finding a medical doctor, which was hard if you're over 60, 65.
Yep.
I kept saying to my son-in-law, the doctor, how do other people navigate this system? So, and I have a master's degree and I'm pretty smart, and it was awful. I mean, as it turned out, I'm fine without the help, but I
But it
truly
shouldn't be that
understand
hard.
what you're talking about. It should
It
not be
shouldn't be
that
that
hard.
hard.
Right.
It's a really public policy issue that we need to address. It shouldn't be that hard. If someone is reaching out, we should be able to find them someone, right? It's a subset of the insurance dilemma we have anyway in the United States, which is very hard to solve. But this is a huge place for that. So yeah.
I was gonna just add to what you said, that I know I've looked at the NAMI resources, and I will tell those of you in Boulder that the NAMI Boulder site is amazing. It has tons and tons of resources, and on all different kinds of mental illnesses, and it's just a great place to go. Sometimes I looked at the NAMI Denver site; it's not quite as there. It's not as accessible on the NAMI Denver, but check out NAMI Boulder.
And by the new head of NAMI Denver is a Road of Shalom member, so we have great.
Oh, okay, great.
He just started a couple of 8 weeks ago or something, so he's still getting his feet wet. But yes, and NAMI also has these really good groups for family members, with people who are involved in their own issue, helping those others along about how to cope with and how to deal with and all sorts of places. And I know people who have found their support groups, both as mentally ill people or as family members, to be really transformative and helpful. It's really good connections.
Yeah. So NAMI just is the National Association for Mental Illness.
It's the National Alliance.
Alliance. Sorry. Thank you.
I never remember what NAMI stands for, and I think it's changed over the years. But yeah, the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill.
Okay, thank you for correcting me. But Gail, I just gave you the letters.
Okay.
But Rabbi Cohen, I have a question. I think that you did a great job of talking about the fears that we have, and I wonder. This comes from the organizational perspective. Is there's so much on the clergy already. And so while the clergy play a huge role in being able to handle any type of illness, from the physical illnesses to, the mental illnesses to substance, abuse and all the other things, it's too much to leave it all on that person or person's shoulders. And so how do we as a congregation create structures or places where people can, one, like you said, get over some of these fears, and two, do that kind of outreach? It was interesting. Carol, who can attest to this, at one of the other synagogues that's part of this effort, they were having their J-Dame Shabbat around mental illness, and two members presented that we had asked to present, or they had asked to present. They're in the same Havara, and they didn't know that each other had these challenges. And so here were two people that could have offered support to each other, but because of stigma and other reasons, they didn't know this about each other. I'm not saying that they should have, but in the sense, it seemed like in this discussion that they had afterwards, they would have found it helpful. Yeah. And yet we have all these ways in which we're not allowing, so I'm just asking, do you have thoughts or ideas, not only just as an individual, what we can do, but as an organization? Are there things that our synagogues can do, or other organizations, to create more sharing spaces, to allow folks to, find more ways to interact and normalize it, like you say?
Well, I mean, one of the things, and we did the mental health Shabbat in February as well, and now we're going to do another one in May with different focus. So, you start with having not just a disabilities committee, but you might have actually a committee on mental illness and addiction or whatever, right? Which is a place where we can begin to talk about programmatically and structurally what could we do, because it's absolutely true. The clergy can't can't lead all of that. It's just too much. I mean, they've got enough on their plates, right? And then my experience, wherever I've gone and talked about my own mental health issues and preached about kind of stuff we can do, right? So at the kiddish or the onig afterwards, half the congregation comes and tells me, I have a this, my mother has a this, my child has a this, my what, right? All over, Reformed, Reconstructionist, Conservative, Orthodox, all of them, wherever I've done this locally and nationally. And so in some ways, having people talk about their own stories is on a regular basis is really powerful. And then identifies that person as someone you can go and say something to. It's not, which is not a curative thing, but in some ways, I think when we do that very publicly, it begins to help people, whatever. I think that we could absolutely get involved in creating our own, people, a support system where people sign up and say, I'd be willing to, be useful for someone who has a mental illness. Or you can sign up and say, I have a mental illness and I'd like to meet other people in the community who have mental illnesses, or I'd like to get someone who would be my friend because I need some help. And there's so much stuff we can do easily online through that kind of a thing, of kind of where we don't make people come out, as it were, but we give them a place where it would be safe to come out. And that's how we begin to match people with other people to say, oh, I have that too, or my kid has that too, or right. And every time, I know when we were scheduling for our February mental health spot, our mental health committee had a very interesting discussion of where we each were saying, well, I have an idea of someone, and so I'll check with them, right? Because I don't want to say anything that they may not want people to know, but they might be interested, right? It's very tricky. And so in some ways, creating those spaces, starting online, if not in person, where people can self-identify, or people can identify as a family member, people can identify as someone who just would like to help if anybody wants help. Can begin to be that place. And as I said, it's always powerful when people tell their own stories, and other people will come and tell them their stories, whoever you are, not just as a rabbi, but because they'll feel like, oh, you were going to say something, Gail?
Well, I was going to ask Janet, we're on the same committee for Road F, dealing with this, and we got the speakers, and I don't know that anybody ever followed up with the speakers, if anybody after hearing their stories might have contacted them. I don't
know either. I know that, and it's harder in some ways. I mean, it's not quite as easy as doing it at kiddish afterwards, right? That would have been
no, and it was all Zoom anyway.
It was all Zoomed, which makes it a little, I think people feel a little more awkward contacting someone. If you if you're actually at a physical kiddish, you can walk up. And my daughter was one of the people who spoke. My daughter spoke about growing up in a family with mental illness. I just have to say, when I asked her originally if she would do so, there was this long pause in the phone. And then she said, it was fine. I said, I think that they're going to want more than that. Right. So at a kiddish or at an onig and someone spoke, you can kind of wander over with your cookie and say, I really appreciate what you had to say, which leads you to then say, and actually, I've had my own whatever. Right. I
wonder if anybody did contact.
I don't know if anybody followed up with any of them, but I think that creating spaces in our community online for people to do that could be a really powerful thing for us to do. Because it does help when you know that you're not alone, right? You don't want to kind of, when our committee was discussing who we should ask, part of you was thinking we'd have that kind of, it's not like you want to call someone up and said, you look depressed when I see you. Do you have depression? Because would you like to talk about it? But at some level, it would be nice to be able to have that conversation, right? Just say, I'm concerned about you. What's up? Or to say, I'm having the exact same experience. Let's have tea. But I think it's hard, and I think that communities. I mean, it starts with, just as we have many of our communities have caring committees that help, new moms get food and people with cancer get rides and like that. you know, having a committee devoted to mental health and addiction issues is both kind of it looks it's powerful because of the appearance of it, just to say we know about it, but we might also be able to delegate some of that then to lay people who want to do some work, you know, and you know, we're all home bored, so doing some work might be good. Yeah, okay, that's not true, Mom.
I have a curiosity.
Go ahead. Go let. Yes.
And that has to do with clergy confidentiality.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that. Yeah,
I was a school counselor. I retired a long time ago from that. And there were two things I always had to tell the kids is that everything you tell me is confidential, except
if you're going to
hurt someone else or if you're going to hurt yourself. How, as a clergy, if you're working with someone under 18, do you build that relationship, yet at the same time say, well, if you tell me this, I have to share this with your parents or social services or whatever. I mean, I always had it. It was always a challenge.
Right. And we have the exact same issue as a clergy person, right? And I think we should do that with our kids and say, this is confidential unless I'm really concerned you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else, in which case we'll need to get help. I also think it's important for clergy to, first of all, not all clergy are particularly interested in doing pastoral care, which is fine. Not everybody, right? But even those of us who do pastoral care need to know our limits too. I've had the experience twice now with somebody who came to talk to me after whatever, and I met with them and it seemed normal and suddenly not. When I realized that the person was psychotic, right? Was not like, it was the first time I understood what the term ideas of reference meant when the person started explaining to me about how Jeremiah had predicted his birth, right? And you suddenly think, huh. And I had to say in both cases, essentially, this is beyond my pay grade, right? I am not trained to work with you, and so I can't. Here's some referrals. With other folks I've worked with, when I become concerned that there's a more severe mental illness, I will often say, I can continue to meet with you, but only if you get yourself a therapist or only if you get yourself a psychiatrist, right? Because I'm not, in fact, a psychoanalyst. I'm not, in fact, right? I have a lot of my own experience being in therapy. I have some training, but right, knowing your limits, and clergy people knowing their limits is really important. And that has to be okay. And be willing to say, I can't meet with you until we've got you set up with someone who's more qualified than I am. And then I'll continue to do pastoral care, but I can't do your whole care because that's not what I'm good at. That's not what I'm able to do. Being a confidential resource for kids, however, can be really important because otherwise they won't tell you.
He didn't disappear. He's just getting the cord because my battery's going dead.
I understand. I won't take it personally then.
Please don't.
Never miss a chance to take something personal. It'll make you miserable. Way to live your life to make yourself miserable.
Very true.
Mom, was there something else you wanted to say?
I was thinking in terms of the competency of the person who wants to be friends with someone else who's looking for a mentally ill partner, as somebody to not partner, but somebody who, I feel that way too.
Right.
I think we want to, something important that you said is that it is not our job to cure the person. We really feel, and if we're a parent, we feel guilty if anything's wrong with our kids. And oh my God, and then you want to fix it. And if it's a good friend, of course you want to fix it. And it's good for us to know that we can't. I even had that experience visiting somebody in a nursing home, and I was telling you, Rabbi, about it, and you said you don't need to be there for 20 minutes. You're not going to make that person less depressed by sitting there. It's not going to change. That's the way the person was that way when you got there, and they're going to be like that when you left. And the fact that you were there at all is the best you can do. You do what you can. And so to not have people misunderstand that this kind of committee or this kind of group is going to be somebody that you'll hook up with who will make you feel better or something, or that the person, a lot of what you said is really, really important for us to know. We don't have to try to fix it. We shouldn't try to fix it.
Yeah.
They're just being there. That's so powerful. Being there is more important, I think, than we realize. Just like as somebody who's been in therapy also forever, just a quiet presence of somebody who's just sitting there and supporting you. And we don't often get that.
That's right.
And
Well,
but to just make that, if we had a group, it had to be clear what the expectations were for each individual
right, but
going to this. Oh, good, I'm getting better. They have a committee for this,
Right.
no?
Training, I mean, right. Training volunteers can be really important.
Training volunteers.
Right?
We
What do
talked about
do?
this in
What
a
can we
committee.
do?
Yeah.
What can't we do? Right? Those kind of things are really important. I'd like to offer a workshop on Bikor Cholim, specifically, what to say and what not to say. Right?
Really?
So many things that we say. I mean, that it's not going to kill anybody, but
Do you offer a workshop that does that?
Yeah, because we'll look at sources, but we'll also talk about kind of how to and how not to.
Oh, you do? No, that's exactly right.
But on the other hand, as I said, it's also true that, if somebody knows that you really care about them and you're really trying to do the right thing, we can forgive a lot. Okay, that wasn't so useful. Try something else.
But you don't want to do damage to somebody and give them advice that's not good advice.
Right. To know that,
something
right.
like that.
So knowing what your role is a
That's
really
right.
important
That's
thing.
right.
But I also
That's
think that Erica was, pointing out, and I think is true, and something we want to figure out how to do is how can we hook up people who are having similar mental health experiences? I know that Har Hashem has a spirituality group, a couple of spirituality group that Rabbi Bronstein runs along with the social worker, but it's in a larger context, in a larger context, how do we connect with one another? And there must be ways of us figuring out the mechanics of that, right? It seems like a mechanical issue. What my leadership training tells me is a technical challenge as opposed to an adaptive challenge. Right? We don't have to change who we are. We just have to figure out how to set it up. And again, that's something that lead people should be taking the lead on, because your rabbis work very hard already.
No, set something like that up a couple years ago. David Bernstein, who's a retired social worker, has set something up to match people with similar issues, and not only mental health, but other things. And I hadn't checked in with him in a year during COVID at all, but people weren't coming forward enough to say, I have this, can you match me up with somebody?
Yeah.
And it was just being advertised on the newsletter. I don't know if it was advertised more than that.
Yeah, and some of us only sometimes read it, which is the reality too.
One other thing, when you're talking about matching up people, and I'm sorry, this was so interesting and I have to leave, but I do a lot of volunteer work for the art museum, and I was repeating to my kids, and I have a calling list to call for Rhoda of older people.
Yeah, right.
Know I'm older. And my daughter said, how can you hook up like the person over here who lives alone and the person over here who lives alone and hook them up? I don't have the answer to that either, but it's another idea.
It's a
Me,
wonderful
personally,
idea.
I'm so over-programmed. I don't need to be hooked up with anybody. I'll certainly call people I know who would like to be, and I don't have the answer to that, but if you figure it out, we'll be in touch. Thank you. Erica, that's my contact.
And I thank you all very much. It's been a joy and a pleasure.
You're awesome.
And thank you. Wow. And
thank you, Rabbi Cohen. This was a wonderful presentation today, and I'm glad we recorded it for other people to listen to.
It is recording. I see the recording sign.
And if you need follow through, if you need clarity, feel free to contact me. I'm at, we can put in the chat, just by the way, right? So, okay, COHEN@gmail.com. There's that.
So Rabbi Cohen, I wanted to thank you for this talk. Jerry and I are members at Congregation B'nai Shalom in Boulder, and
Mhm.
we're working with Erica, and we're in early stages of trying to put
Yeah.
some programming together, and I'm processing. You've really put a lot of good ideas in my head, and I'm just trying to process some of the things we'll eventually talk about at our next meeting. But really, thank you so much.
You're welcome. And as I said, feel free to be in touch. I put my email and my phone number in the chat there.
I mean, I need to just reemphasize, and I'm speaking to the choir here, how necessary it is to normalize
Yeah.
these issues. My daughter had physical health issues as a young person, and I talked with everybody and anybody who would stand still long enough to talk with me about it. And our son has gone through mental health issues, and Aaron and I did a little program with Bonet, and we talked about it, and it's so much more difficult
Yeah.
to feel safe and good about sharing. And if there was any way I could just really get that message out to the greater world,
Yeah.
that would be such a huge step in the right direction. So,
Yeah.
but thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. It's, 5:30, so we should probably all go get dinner,
Right.
Whatever that might be. Many of us are still eating a lot of bread products because we're still,
Thank you so much, Rabbi Cohen. And thank you all for being here. And again, I know, Marilyn, I'm 100% with you that if we could make it as easy to talk about mental illness as it is to talk about physical illness, we would be moving out significantly in the right direction. But I do want to say, I think all the synagogues that are involved in the Jewish Disability Advocates Program are trying. And that's better than we were before, right? So like there's a lot of attention being paid to this. We're making small steps in the right direction. And I believe every one of the JDA organizations is committed to that. So it feels like even though it will take time, as Rabbi Cohen said, this is not something with an individual, it doesn't happen overnight, nor with an organization does it happen. But I'm really appreciative of all the effort that is going into making our organizations more welcoming and supportive and inclusive of those with mental illness. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much. And Erica, if you need anything, feel free to call.
Great.
So take care, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy your Sunday.